I'd suggest Sydney has been one of the most corrupt places in the Western world.
Really?
Forever and a day. They say that you're never further, in a big city, you're never further than 10 feet from a rat, okay?
Yeah.
You know, there's one behind the wall there somewhere. There'll be a few out in the alley. Crime is a bit like that. That's why the crooks are so keen to bring it here, because they can turn, 10 kilos into big money here.
Yeah.
That it's not worth big money in Mexico, because it's cheap there. So get it to Australia. If you get it past the gatekeepers, you're home and home. You got the price of 5 Maseratis.
Now, Dos, I'm so excited for our next guest today because this is an area we probably haven't dived very deep into.
You a bit nervous?
I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm very excited. Andrew Rule, welcome to the dos&d show.
Yes, well, it's a pleasure and a privilege. I have to be honest, until a week or so ago, I didn't know who you were, but now I'm overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. We can see it in your face. Yeah. No, we're very, very excited to welcome you here, Andrew. And firstly, I mean, we'd love to start it off with the new book that's coming out. Is it out now?
It's out this end of this week.
Perfect time. Perfect. You couldn't have timed it any better.
They are backing trucks into loading bays all over Australia.
Life and crimes.
Putting it in the shops. And it'll be there in all good bookshops and most bad ones.
So tell us a little bit about that book.
That book is really a compilation of some of the better stories I've written over 40 years.
Okay.
So there's some of my old favourites, that have been stories and big crimes. It's called Life and Crimes, which is cunningly a reference to my podcast, which is called Life and Crimes. You can see the connection.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
perfect.
A very subtle cross promotion.
Well, have you got a little story in there you can maybe tease us with now?
They're all big stories.
Yeah.
I'll give you a secret. There's 22 stories in there, but sadly the publishers only read the first page of the contents and they've said 18 stories. So there's 4 more.
Bonuses.
There's 4 more than people think they're going to get. So
Beautiful.
Yeah, they're crime stories. They're not funny. There are elements of humour in some crime stories, but the big ones that I remember are often the unsolved, the ones that have gone unpunished, nobody arrested. What happened to so-and-so, obviously abducted and murdered, whatever it might be. And one I've written about for this weekend's paper, which of course will be out and published before this goes to air, is about a pack rape that happened on Melbourne Cup Day 1976.
Wow.
To 2 schoolgirls who were in Year 9, and one of them I have known and written about her and her ongoing drama, trying to catch the bad guys, for more than 20 years. So I've had another go at her story, which is one of the most gripping and awful stories I've ever written, and it reminds me a lot of that film Dead Man Walking. I don't know if you saw that, but it's a very spooky film based on a real case in America. And so that is one of the 22 stories, not 18, in the book. And there are many others. There's profiles of old gunmen like Billy the Texan Longley, who used to drink in pubs around this patch of South Melbourne. And there's a lot of different yarns from a lot of different eras. And there's sort of my pin-ups, pin-up stories. There are many others, and I've published alone and with John Sylvester many books with many stories.
Yeah, you and John are so well known, obviously in the space. But I want to ask, especially with that last one, something probably more personal. You knew the person, working with them for the last 2 decades.
That person, I met her because of what happened to her.
Okay, yeah.
She's not a friend per se.
Okay.
But I've become, I feel for her.
Do you build relationships with the people you speak with?
To be frank, it's one of the trickiest things in our business, because you realise that when you're dealing with damaged people, that they start to rely on you. They can rely on you, and they see you as some sort of a friend, a confidant, and to some extent as if they're on the psychiatrist's couch. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a baggy-ass journo who can't even type properly. But there's an element of that you end up hearing their secrets, and they bare their soul, and people that have been hurt badly by events, they sort of build up a rapport and a trust in you that's not always justified, because in the end we have to move on, just like you do tomorrow. You move to the next interview. I do too. So we're not best friends really, but when you're dealing with damaged people, you know, I don't mind that tomorrow you don't ring, you don't call.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with very damaged people, they do, and they want to stay in touch, and they want to ring you up and tell you the latest thing that happened. They see you as some sort of, maybe, you know, a little bit white knight in shining armour, a little bit of a, you know, the psychiatrist thing.
I'm sure they
a
feel
little
heard.
bit of a doctor.
You know, they feel heard.
All of that. And look,
Yeah.
police and doctors must bear the brunt of this sort of stuff all the time.
For sure.
I'm sure detectives in certain fields, homicide particularly, must get a lot of this, that people rely on them. And I think it's hard to do that, because you can't be mean to people, and yet you say, look, I can't sort of just embrace your story and you forever, because
Yes.
I've got so many other things to do. It's tricky.
It's interesting too, and we were actually talking about this before, and one of the questions we pondered too is, especially like we're talking Underbelly and things like that, and some of these stories that have gone on for decades.
Yep.
Do you build a relationship, you're talking about building relationships with victims, do you build a relationship on some level with the flip side, the crooks, the people that may be reoccurring?
Not as much as people imagine. People say to, you know, none of us know what other people's lives are like, what other people's jobs are like, you know. But they say to me, oh, it must be dangerous what you do, you know. And I say, well, not really, because I wouldn't do it if it was too dangerous. But I have, you know, got to know some people. Billy Longley, I went to his, killed probably 12 or 15 people, maybe, who knows. He certainly never confirmed it. Billy the Texan Longley, famous old-time notorious painter and docker, gunman, and pretty good at it, and died, with, you know, at the age of 80-something of natural causes, whereas a lot of his enemies did not. They died, got dropped in the bay or something. Yeah. So, I got to know old Billy a bit. Roger Rogerson, I've been to his house in Sydney. I went on tour with him and Chopper and Jacko once to write a story about him. I met him in Sydney two or three times on various things. I sort of got to know him a bit and talked to him a bit on the phone. I mean, friends is not the right word, but we're on reasonably civil terms. But both of us were using the other.
Yep.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I needed bits and pieces of him, and he needed what he thought he needed, what I could do for him. So there are some. Chopper, I knew really well.
Yeah.
Really, really well. Rang me and wrote to me for years from Tasmania, to the point that when he pranged a car or something once at 2 o'clock in the morning, he rang me. I've just rolled a car in Evandale in Tasmania. I said, what the effing hell are you ringing me for? You know, I'm on the wrong side of the Bass Strait for a start. But there you go.
Yeah.
I was sort of the nearest thing to, you know, a friendly uncle.
Yep.
In a way. So, which is a bit sad for him, really, when you think
He's
about
an interesting one, Chopper, because
Yeah.
he's almost, don't want to say glorified, but he is in a sense, because he was such a big figure in the industry.
Yeah. Look, he understood. He was actually he was intelligent. He was a natural raconteur. He was funny.
Yeah.
People sort of think I'm gilding the lily a bit here, but I'm not. He was an original mind, and he actually reminded me a bit of Muhammad Ali, who could, you know, come out with rhyming couplets and, you know, little poetic touches and all that sort of rapper's instinct. Well, Chopper had that about him. He could do that.
Yeah.
He could knock out a rough, tough poem that rhymed in minutes.
Wow.
He was funny. He could tell jokes and tell funny stories. He had a big presence when he told a story. He was I think he was the head of the debating side at Risdon Prison in Tassie, because he was good at that stuff. And he was able to survive inside and out, in jail and outside, but particularly inside, because he was sharper than a lot of the guys. It's not that they weren't big, strong young blokes that they could have killed him, really, because he'd had a lot of wounds and, you know, all that. But he could outpoint them. He could outplay them in the chess game. I found him, he could be a pain in the arse too. And, you know, he had his bad points. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But I sort of liked him in many ways. And when he was frank and genuine, he could be quite philosophical and quite wise, amazingly. But he put on the show. He did vaudeville for what you saw out in the world was the vaudeville chopper.
Yes.
The act. Behind the scenes, he knew that was all it was. You know, he was a clown putting on the clown face.
You mentioned like you've never felt scared or threatened. We had on a few months ago probably a colleague of yours at some stage, Mike Sheehan.
Yeah.
And he talked about
Jacko.
phone call.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about Jacko.
sorry.
But,
Yeah, you're right, though.
But calls, you know, coming through at all hours, you
Yeah.
know, and threatening calls from players.
Yeah.
Have you been on the end of some of these calls? And if so,
Well,
how do they typically go?
Some years ago, I made the mistake of trying to get on an aeroplane, and I'd forgotten that I had in my briefcase a collapsible baton, you know, which are illegal. And I'd sort of forgot it was there, and I think I bought it over. I did buy it overseas, and I had it for years probably, and I forgot I had it in my briefcase. And I go to get on a plane in a hurry. It was a short notice, go to Sydney, and they call me over and go, "What's this?" And I go, "Oh God, sorry." Anyway, it's not good. So they technically arrested me, and I technically had to go to court, and I technically had to have a defence. So I made a list of all the perceived threats to me, actual threats where people had rung up, and perceived threats, which were more important because they're from people who don't actually ring you, but you know they hate you.
Yeah.
And I had a list. In the end, I had a list of more than 20. So I'd probably clocked up close to one a year over the journey from about 1983 when I got a death threat over a story I wrote. And I've got some pretty tasty enemies.
Yeah.
I got
I bet you do,
a
yeah.
couple in particular that are very tasty. So there is, you know, there's a few people that don't like me, and because of the things I've written.
There's such a large, and it probably has been for such a long time because you've done what you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time.
Yep.
Is the appetite for these crime stories, right? The audience, and now it's probably now moved from, you know, writing and reading to now it's documentaries and docuseries and Netflix and podcasts and like you've got a great crime podcast. But what is it that like captures such an audience? Because it seems like we laugh about it is people love watching a crime doco before they go to sleep, you know?
Yeah, I don't know why they do that. I think with mine, I'm very boring and I put them to sleep. A lot of the ladies at the gigs we do go, "Oh, the last thing I hear at night is your voice," because I listen to it and I think, yeah, well, that'd be right. It'd put you to sleep. But to be fair and honest, all humanity is interested in life and death.
Yes.
And winners and losers and right and wrong. And, you know, that stuff, that visceral, will he beat my head in with a rock or will I beat his head in? That's essentially us from cavemen onwards. And when you think about it, all forms of performing art, like Shakespeare, opera, TV drama, live drama, whatever, by and large, if it's not comedy, it's that.
Yes,
they're all
true.
variations on crime stories. They're all about sex, death and betrayal in the end, if they're not comedy. And even comedy sometimes got those elements in it as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's Shakespeare, what's Macbeth if it's not a crime story? It's got about a king and others, but it's still, you know, he's going
That's
to
very
kill
true.
his way
Yep.
out of the... He's the same as Billy Longley. He's
Yeah.
the same as the mafia chiefs.
Yeah.
What is The Merchant of Venice, where the pound of flesh and all that, if it's not a cracker mafia story about an extortionist, about you know, the guys that lend money, hence the term Shylock. They call them Shylocks in America, people that lend money at extortionate interest rates because of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice.
Yeah, right.
So all the things we watch and listen to, and they are variations on crime stories. So it's not actually a new fascination. It's just that these days we do it with podcasts, we do it with TV. We're not sitting around a campfire talking anymore. We're doing it in front of that.
It's a different form of media.
Different form of,
Yeah.
but we're still communicating stories to each other.
This episode of the dos&d show with Andrew Rule is brought to you by our friends at Fleet Plan Hire Solutions.
Andrew has made a career, hasn't he, Dos, of solving the mysteries of Melbourne, Sydney, Australia. I tell you what's not an unsolved mystery is why Fleet Plan Hire Solutions is just the best in the business. Customer service, truck hire, fleet hire, plant hire, they just do it all, don't they, Dos?
Head to fbh.com.au to find out more.
Back to the episode with Andrew Rule. When a story breaks, let's say something happens, there's a crime takes place, there's murder, whatever. How quick are you to the scene? How does it work?
Long time since I've done that.
But when, sorry, I should have prefaced by saying when you were doing that, how does that work, or how would it work for the person doing it now?
Well, it's probably roughly similar. Except for this, back in the day when I was doing that sort of stuff, my friend and colleague John Sylvester's been an actual police reporter, crime reporter, all his career. That's what he's done since he was 18 or 19. I've done all different things. You know, I've sort of drifted in and out of that scene. But the police reporters that cover that beat, they get either they hear the official stuff or they get tipped off. In the past, we had good tip-off systems. You know, we'd have friendly coppers that would tell us stuff. That sort of thing's gone out the door now.
Oh, really?
A lot. Not altogether, but a lot, because there's far more watertight now. In the old days, journos would go to the pub with coppers and they'd get on the booze together and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And each journo would have a friendly copper that would, a detective, the crime squads, I mean, who'd tip them off to stuff and say, oh, this, get here, do this. And this Maria James case, Thornbury Bookshop, which you might have heard of, it's 40 years ago. Johnny Sylvester was one of the first, it's the first murder he ever went to. The police who went to that day, they were young coppers then, they're all now retired. That's how long ago it is. It's those days they could just sort of, he was invited into the scene, John. You know, he walked in, he said there was blood on the walls and all that. Well, that's
how I imagine
that's not
it.
going to happen
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen now.
That's how I was imagining it, though.
It was much rougher and readier then.
Yeah.
How does it come about when you are writing? Like, I'd love to know your process. So when you are, say, writing that book, or maybe let's not go that book. Let's just go when you're working for The Age, right? And
or the Herald Sun.
or the Herald Sun, wherever you were writing for at the time. What was your process?
I'm a bit instinctive. I'm very keen on getting the top right. I tend to write colour or stuff with a bit of resonance, not just straight. It's a long time since I've written straight news stories. In fact, I might not have written a straight news story in this century, possibly. But I write, colour and stuff with tone, quite long stories, beginning, middle, end, all that, That you're using the techniques of a novelist or the big magazine writers, So you're looking for the way into the story, and so you're really worried about how to start it and then how to get the second paragraph and how to loop in the third paragraph so it builds consecutively and then you get a flow. And I tend to sort of follow my nose. I go, that sounds good. I'll read that back. Oh, it doesn't sound so good when I read it back. In fact, I don't like that at all. And then I start again. And then I write stuff. And then next morning, early, I get up early, I read it and I go, well, the intro's all right, but the next part stinks. And so I'll take that bit out.
Yeah.
The bit that seemed okay the night before, after dinner and 2 red wines, not so good at not so good at breakfast time. So I redo it. And writing is actually rewriting. The art of writing is rewriting. And the people that don't write that well, they don't rewrite much.
Gotcha. Interesting. This is something we were talking about too, and I would love to know, because all of us, we go around living our lives here, especially here in Melbourne, you can talk about it. How much crime is going on right as we speak that we don't even know about, in terms of the person that owns the pubs we drink in could be connected in some way? I don't know. The person that runs...
If you're buying cigarettes at the tobacco store.
That's true. That's true. But in terms of And I know it's a very broad question. I don't even know how to articulate it properly. But is there more? Is there way more? You know, pieces being
Educated guess here. They say that you're never further in a big city. You're never further than 10 feet from a rat. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, there's one behind the wall there somewhere. There'll be a few out in the alley. Crime is a bit like that. So, without defaming anybody in particular, when you walk down these inner suburban streets and other streets elsewhere, and out where I live, you know, for a while in Camberwell, within sight of my closest corner to my house, there were 3 of those massage joints. Mm-hmm. There was one there, there was one upstairs there and one up there. I think 2 of them are gone now. But those Thai massage things, a little blinking thing, open, staying. And now and again you'd see some buck come around at knock-off time to pick up the girls or the girl or whatever. And you think, well, you look a bit tasty. And then you see another guy in there sort of counting the takings and all this. And clearly those joints are sort of fringe dwellers. They're not outright crime, but they'll be using, you know, girls from probably on student visas. They're probably not supposed to be working in Australia anyway. They'll be doing cash. They'll be, you know, cheating the tax man.
Yep.
And presumably offering services that are technically breaches of whatever acts are in place to control, you know, brothels and all the rest of it.
Yes.
They're not licensed brothels. So there's one example of that sort of low-level hum of crime. Mm-hmm. The tobacco places are the other one, and we're starting to hear about them now because they're burning them down. But until they started to burn each other down, we didn't take much notice. But the government and the health departments are busy saying, "Oh, Australians don't smoke much anymore. Look, the total sales figures are right down because we're all giving it up and we're all." But that was nonsense. The fact is, people were walking down to the joint to buy the chop, the cheap stuff.
Yeah. And
now that has become big deal because they're burning each other out. 5 years ago, nobody talked about it. But a lot of people were buying their chop, and that was imported stuff that was imported by crooks, the same guys who bring the drugs in. It was chop grown up in the hills by the same people that, you know, used to grow the dope or do grow the dope up in the back blocks. And so you've got highly organised and dangerous crooks involved in those things that are in your street around your corner.
Yeah.
There's somebody going into that joint collecting money
Exactly why
who
I asked
goes
that
back
question.
to somebody else who probably gets people killed occasionally. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's that heavy.
In regards to...
So that's crime.
Yeah. Well, how, maybe you mentioned like the trafficking of drugs and stuff. How bad is like the drug culture in Australia?
Well, the experts say plenty because apparently we Australians they got spendable income.
Yeah.
And they spend certain sector of society spends quite a lot of it on drugs, which is why Australian cocaine, I think, is sold for more in Australia than any other market in the world, which is why it's funny, that supply and demand. That's why the crooks are so keen to bring it here, because they can turn, 10 kilos into big money here.
Yeah.
That it's not worth big money in Mexico because it's cheap there. So get it to Australia. If you get it past the gatekeepers, you're home and hosed. You got the price of 5 Maseratis.
Well, typically, what's the process from there to getting it into a consumer's hand in a nightclub on a Saturday night? Like, what's the process, how it filters down into...
Well,
there's
a big importers. They're basically guys that have got what they call a door, that is an opening into the country.
Yep.
They've got someone on side somewhere in the airlines or the shipping, someone who can get stuff through. Now, you'd think they must have a bit of help with somebody in Border Force now and again. You think they must have help with maybe somebody in Federal Police occasionally, don't know. But they must have some inside info somewhere, even about who's going to be patrolling which river, which bit of the coast, all that stuff, Because for every one they catch, and sometimes they have big busts, we know that there's more than that getting in because the price doesn't alter after the big busts.
Yep.
funny about that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Are a lot of, and I've listened, I was actually watching a video on YouTube of you early this morning and talking about bikies and how...
What did I say?
No. It was basically, and it was about how a lot of bikie, the word bikie and the term bikie has changed a lot from what it used to be. That's what you were talking about.
Yeah,
so
true.
you were talking about how back in the day it was probably seen as these groups, these gangs of bikies, or you join a club, was about, you know, tattoos and drinking beer and being in the clubhouse with the guys.
Very much Aussie knockabout stuff.
Aussie knockabout stuff.
But like the footy club, but more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today's day and age is bikies are making millions and millions of dollars.
Organised crime,
Yep.
heavies, the martial arts aspect.
Yeah.
All that different. You know, there used to be boozy blokes with pot bellies. Back when I started in journalism, Hell's Angels and Coffin Cheaters and Finks and all that, they were sort of Anglo-Celtic, dirty, hard drinking, slobby.
I'm picturing guys with long hair and like
often
bandanas.
Sort of tradie labourer types, but often ex-army, ex-service for all that. There was that bit of the brotherhood thing.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting a bloke he'd been in the Finks, I think, in the first year I started in newspapers, is 49 years ago, in Sale in Victoria, eastern Victoria. I met a bloke in a pub there rough little bloke, and he reckoned he'd been in the early Finks in Newcastle or up that way, up in New South. And he said to me, he told me all this stuff about what they used to do as when you wanted to join, you had to do all these terrible things, you know, very
Like an initiation.
very nasty, yeah. And he said the saying, the only thing I remember, he said the saying was, "A fink stinks, but you better smile when you smell him." That was sort of their saying. So
Yeah.
I know they were filthy and
Yeah.
not very nice people at all. But these days, still not very nice, but they're now hooked into distribution of drugs, distribution of most, you know, the amphetamine, speed, that was their big thing. And that came out of California. In fact, the Angels had the recipe for speed and they sent it over to Australia, and the Australian guys in Melbourne, out at east of Melbourne, out Lilydale or somewhere, started to make speed back in the 70s. And those guys, those pioneers, there's a few of them still alive, the odd ones still alive, were involved in that. And it got pretty heavy, and the Californian head guys in the Angels sent a guy out to Australia to shoot a copper in Melbourne. And he was told this copper, I'm trying to think who he was. He said he looks just like Benny Hill. Remember Benny Hill?
Yeah.
And anyway, the police got onto this, and they caught the bloke, and he had thumb cuffs, you know, those little cuffs you can use on. Sorry.
That's
you
all right.
can use on, and he had this and that and all this incriminating stuff. And they sent the copper that it was his target, and he had the guy's address and all this stuff. And the copper that was the target was shown into his cell, and he looks up and he says, "Damn, you do look like Benny Hill." And he'd been sent to kill him.
Wow.
And the coppers caught him, and he was deported, whatever. I'm trying to... Jim Brandy's his name was. Jim Brandy.
Right.
Yeah, from California. So that even back in the 70s, there was that connection with what was rapidly becoming organised crime, drug-based.
Yeah.
And as soon as one lot of bikies had the recipe, others wanted it, and then, you know, they'd be argy-bargy over who was going to run the drugs. And some clubs split between the old-timers who said, no, we just drink beer and we don't like drugs, and others who said, bugger it, this is where the money is. So they had, you know...
I know this is rare, but it does happen. So what, in regards to these bikies, when you hear about, oh, there's a drive-by shooting here, or this has happened here, or someone was stabbed here, or what do those typically mean, these drive-by shootings that you hear about?
They're turf wars over drugs money, essentially. And if it's not drug money, it's some other criminality.
Yeah.
There's some racket. So if it's not drugs, it probably will be drugs. But, you know, maybe it's massage parlours. Maybe it's, you know, a chop shop thing where they're stealing German cars and pulling them to bits and selling.
Yeah.
There are rackets around, but always turf wars essentially over money and over illegal forms of easy money.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Do you know of any, over your journey and investigating all this sort of stuff, some of these bikies that are possibly in bed, for lack of a better word, with people that are high up in the police force or the government? Have you found connections between that?
Happened. It has happened more so. Happens everywhere.
Yeah.
But I'd suggest Sydney has been one of the most corrupt places in the Western world.
Really?
Forever and a day, since the Rum Rebellion in 1801 or whatever it was. Queensland not a lot better. Back the Sunshine State, the Moonlight State, all that. Very bad news.
Yeah.
Perth is run. People say to me, and people who should know, Perth is sort of run between the bikies and the coppers. The sort of big blue gang on one side, and I don't know if they're always holding hands, but between them they run the joint. So there has historically been bent police and bent politicians and bent, to some extent, public servants at enabling certain organised crime to flourish. And meanwhile, putting their foot on other forms of crime so that these guys can flourish and these ones won't.
Yeah, because and that's why when you hear the term like this person runs this city or runs this small town. I mean, even think about the town we grew up in, and I remember just hearing all these rumblings of this cafe and this restaurant, they're owned by this person, it's all funded by drug money, blah blah blah. But when you hear the term you just use Perth as an example, run by bikies and coppers. When you say it's run by, what do you actually?
Well, these are big sweeping statements.
Yeah.
And probably what we literally mean is they got their fingers in a lot of illegal pies.
So they're profiting off,
profiting from crime, and then taking the money and putting it into legit stuff, because smart crooks want to legitimise take black money and clean it, and put it into. So in America, I mean, home of organised crime, really. Organised crime in America really went from being, the Wild West and cattle rustlers through to Italian migrants standing over each other for their onion money or something, to prohibition in the 20s when they prohibited alcohol.
Yeah.
Well, straight away, it just bred organised crime, because suddenly you could bring in a boatload of whiskey across the river from Canada and make millions, in down south, in the speakeasies. And so what Prohibition did, and this is what we're doing with drugs, because we prohibited drugs. Prohibition turned all those fuddy-duddy old funny Italian blokes who were, talking Italian to each other, into the 5 families of New York that became the most powerful forces of organised crime on the planet. That's what Prohibition did. You went from Uncle Guido, joke, with a big moustache, to Al Capone, and the others machine gunning each other, right through to the current day guys.
Crazy.
In regards to guns, I know you wrote about the Port Arthur massacre.
Yeah, I did.
And obviously, our laws changed around that.
Yeah.
Are guns pretty relevant as well within the bikie scene in terms of how they make money?
Enforcement. And look, the rules governing guns, the laws governing guns, probably don't have a big effect on crims, because crims get them.
Yeah.
They've got dirty money. If you've got enough money, you can buy anything. So gun laws don't really matter much to crooks that much. It just means they pay a bit more to buy what they're to buy. Sorry, I've lost track of what.
Well, maybe even I'd love to hear you touch on the Port Arthur massacre and writing about that too. What are your recollections of that whole time?
Well, there's certainly a case to be made that when you've got a lunatic like that guy, who's, brain-addled simpleton, that access to military-grade semi-automatic weapons was what enabled him to do what he did. There's no doubt about that. His easy access to those guns is what caused Port Arthur. And had he only been able to get, a single shot 22, he might have shot one person. And before somebody took it off him and hit him over the head with it.
Yeah.
So it's that sort of firepower, that anti-personnel military grade firepower, in my view. And I come from the country, I grew up on farms, I grew up with guns, I'm quite familiar with them, I'm happy to use them, I'm not against them. In fact, I sort of come from that country gun culture in a way.
Yeah.
But I can't see a strong argument for that sort of military grade hardware to be available to every Tom, Dick and Harry. It's not a legit thing.
Did it cause a ruckus? Because you hear over in America and it gets talked about and all these school shootings and we need to do exactly what Australia did. Did it cause a bit of a ruckus when that happened, when the rule got put in place?
Totally did. And also because people got, all the gun lobby, they feared that they'd be all, they wouldn't be able to get any guns at all and all that, and people get their backs up. Law-abiding people. I mean, our family in the country, my grandmother and my mother, and they had to hand in rifles they'd had all their lives. They did. They just handed them in. So you had all these farmers and legit people handing over guns that they'd owned. Their father gave it to them when they turned 21, and they had to hand it in and get it crushed. You can understand why people were not happy any more than you would be if, you had granddad's ute and somebody said, well, you're not allowed to have that, son. We're going to crush it. You'd be really dark on it. So you can understand that sort of mixture of emotion and affect, all that. But there was, John Howard actually had the guts to push the laws through, and he wore a bulletproof vest at the big meeting up at Rosedale, I think it was, in East Gippsland. So there was fears that his advisors obviously said, and the federal police, some lunatic could try and take a shot at you here, and which thank God they didn't, but it did stir up a lot of emotions, and those emotions are still apparent. And I know guys that still mutter about it, and they say stupid things like Port Arthur was a setup. It wasn't really, the guy that did
like
it, Martin
conspiracy,
Bryant, and all this sort of.
It was to get this law.
All this nonsense. People do talk nonsense. If that's the one thing I've learned in 50 years of journalism, most people talk nonsense about things they know nothing about.
Sure. In terms of organised crime, and this is a huge hypothetical question, but if it was all be abolished, right? If drugs were either legalised or totally gone away, let's say all these, these people that run the cities, blah blah blah, they're suddenly defunded, whatever. What happens to society? Is it actually in our best interest to keep a level of it, or is it? It's
one of the great questions, and no one can really give you the straight answer on that, because if you suddenly legalised everything, it's not as if, bad behaviour is going to go away, or that people aren't going to get off their faces on drugs. The fact that it's legal doesn't mean it's suddenly going to all tidy up. It does remove the big profit margin.
Yeah.
It takes that, but of course they'll have to move into, crime will move into something else where there's a profit.
That's true.
There will always be people trying to cut corners.
Because you always hear people say, like, well, if the drugs people are taking is coming from a safer or cleaner source or whatever.
All of that. And you can make really good arguments for that. You say, oh, kids going to rave, going to whatever, and they're taking, if it was clean stuff, they wouldn't overdose. And true. And if you ever knew anybody that overdosed, you'd be really for it. It's a very vexed question, though, all of that. I've sort of got the belief that nearly all crime we hear about, from home invasions through to some bad traffic accidents, through all sorts of stuff, is drug-related.
Yeah.
So at the low level, it's idiots take stuff. You see them on Friday afternoon, you'll see them today, knocking off building sites and driving utes with CFMEU stickers on them at 160 Ks down the Geelong Road and down up the freeways, because they get on the stuff at lunchtime.
I've been hit by one once.
Well, there you are.
Yeah.
There's a drug-related at the low level, but it can kill you.
Yeah.
And at the next level up, it's, they're shooting each other over turf wars. Next level up, they're corrupting the police and customs and politicians or whatever at the high level of importing it. And at the really low level, you got these kids being sent in by older crooks to do home invasions or whatever in order to get stolen cars, in order to use the stolen cars to go and burn down a tobacco store or whatever.
Yes.
So drugs are mixed up at every level of that.
Wow.
In some way.
You obviously wrote the Underbelly books with John Sylvester, and I would like to know, like, obviously it became more and more, I guess. We talk about the forms of media changed. So I would like to know, did you have a lot to do with the shows that were then got created?
Not really.
'Cause I was going to say you would have made some money out of that.
No, it's a bit of a misnomer. You'll notice that John and I are not living in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And we still, last night we were out after starting work I got up at 5 a.m. yesterday and worked, and I got home at 11 o'clock, and I'm 67. So we're not multimillionaires. You don't make big money out of those things, out of Australian drama productions. It's a gypsy industry, basically, staffed by people in the gig economy.
Yeah.
And so somebody gets to write something, and then they starve for 6 months and pull beer somewhere, and then they do another one. Where we made some money was selling the books off the back of them. We sold a lot of Chopper books, and we sold a lot of Underbelly books. And so for us, the Chopper film, which is an excellent film, and the Underbelly series, of which the first series was good and the others were not so good, they sold books for us, which we were very happy about. But the actual payment from it's trifling.
For those that may not actually be aware, like there could be international listeners that may have no idea what we're even talking about. Can you give us a bit of a premise of
international listeners?
Yeah.
Hello, Iceland. How's the weather in Reykjavik?
Yeah.
What are some of the countries that are random?
We'd have to look. It's ridiculous.
Dubai, possibly. A lot of our crime is run out of Dubai.
Dubai. There's always the Middle East. We get a bit there. I suspect
Chopper. Well, Chopper.
Maybe more the Underbelly is an example.
Underbelly.
Yeah.
Underbelly was a very good name thought up by John Sylvester as just a catch-all word to cover the sort of crime scene, which we used on collections like this, collections of crime stories. So that one is a collection of crime stories by me, but John and I used to put our heads together every year and we'd throw in our best stories of the year. I would go through them all and tidy them up. We'd elongate them, make them a bit more of them, a few more photographs, a few smart-ass captions, and we'd publish these books ourselves. We used to do it ourselves. And Underbelly was a good word as a sort of a catch-all, but the breakthrough came years after we did that, when Eddie Maguire, who did us a great favour, Eddie was always a fan of all this stuff. I knew Eddie when he was a little kid riding the cricket and stuff.
Yeah,
like
of course,
that.
yeah.
And he was just this kid on a push bike, He used to come out to Windy Hill and file both hands to AAP and all that. He was a red hot, very smart, hard-working kid. And when he was at Channel 9 and going pretty well, he had the footy show, he used to say to us, I've got to get Sydney involved we should do a series. And he kept getting knocked back by Sydney. They said, women won't like it, it's too masculine and it's too Melbourne and blah, blah, blah. And they'd knock it back. When he got to Sydney and became briefly the head honcho at Channel 9, the first thing he did was call in, somebody from the next office and say, can you ring these blokes in Melbourne and sign them up? We're going to do Underbelly as a drama series.
Wow.
And he did it. And he got it done, and guess what? It was a smash hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all that crap from the experts about, women won't like it and blah, 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 they were absolutely dead wrong. They could not have been more wrong.
Yep.
How are we going?
No, good. He's trying to find a bit of stuff.
a bit of the music, the song from the first Underbelly.
So back to, I guess, Dee's question around like what is it? So that's really interesting hearing that about Eddie. And I've watched the series. I haven't read the books. I remember my dad actually reading the books and loving them. But what were some of the key, I guess, stories within that whole Underbelly
Well, they took that first series.
Yeah, that first one's a good one.
First one is a very good. It's good drama.
Yeah.
But it was a good drama based loosely on real events and real characters.
Yep.
So it was Alphonse Gangitano as played by Vince.
Yeah.
It was Benji Veneman as played by Damien Walsh Howling. You know, they were very good actors, acting parts that they instinctively knew how to do, and it was pretty tough. I mean, it was a commercial dramatic script which took much license, but it was somewhat near the truth, and it worked. It worked really well. The whole thing, the music was good, the look was good, the actors looked the part. After that, and of course they got into legal trouble.
Did they?
Yeah.
Yeah, because of all the court cases and stuff. And after that, it sort of went south because they drifted further and further from the real stories, and it just got that way. I didn't take any interest in it, basically, because the best of it was the start of it.
It's a two-part question. So, what's the best story that's still unsolved or there's still mystery?
Biggest?
Oh, just your favourite, maybe.
Well,
That's still. Is there an unsolved murder or mystery or
there's-
something that you just wish you knew the answer to?
The big one in Australia, the big one is the Beaumont children, 1966. 3 kids vanish from a crowded beach on Australia Day, 1966, Glenelg Beach, never seen again. That Anna, Jane and Grant, I remember then, everybody alive then remembers their names. The oldest one was 9, down to a little boy about 3. Terrible thing, clearly abducted and murdered. And it was the same month, it was the same, 3-week period where Australia went to the decimal currency. So this happened on the 26th of January. On the 14th of February, 18 days later, Australia switched to decimal currency. So it was the start of a whole new world for Australia, and that is new money and this shocking crime, which is sort of like something you'd hear about in America. And it was the start of something.
There it is.
And I was, a little kid then, and I remember it clearly. And that's got to be the biggest unsolved in Australia.
Connor, do you want to bring that golf box over,
The golf
mate?
box.
So essentially, Andrew, the golf box, we've got a few questions, a few quirky questions in there. You pull one out, and we're talking to you off air, and you don't mind a little bit of golf. So
Just before you pull one out, keep going, Dos.
And no, you go for it, man. You want to do the ad read?
Oh, I'll quickly go. What's in the Golf Box is brought to you by our good friends at Golf Box, Australia's greatest golf superstore. If you need it,
they've got it, and it gets to you fast and free. Head to golfbox.com.au. Put your hand in there, Andrew. See what comes out. I wonder what he's going to get.
And then we'll send you home with some golf.
Okay, this is a green ticket, and it says,
D's handwriting.
"What's the worst excuse you've used to get out of something?"
Ooh.
Well, we're throwing him
Hope the wife's not
You should have warned
listening.
me that. I need cheat notes. The worst excuse. Oh no!
Have you ever had an excuse for
I think I
an
better
article
pull-
not coming in on time?
That dog ate my homework sort of stuff.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of anything that's especially
Well,
nothing
you
funny.
can go for
I better
another one if you like. Go for
Yeah.
another one.
I think we better find something I can do.
There
Is
you
that the
go.
same one?
What's that one?
Have you ever sent a text or pic to the wrong person? Who and when? Oh, I'm sure everybody has.
Yeah, we all
yeah.
have.
And it's not really damning or anything, but I can recall clearly sending something about somebody else to that guy.
Yeah.
And I was mortified because he was a great friend of mine and I loved him dearly, and I referred to him by his surname to a third party.
Oh no.
And sort of, and I cared much more about the main guy than I did about the third party. But it was just one of those things we all do,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saw Jimmy the other day and whatever. And he sent me a nice note saying, I think this is meant for somebody else.
Oh, that's horrible.
And I've never forgotten it. Yes.
Golf Box want to present you with a $250 voucher, Andrew.
Oh,
So,
do they?
yep. So take that. Enjoy that.
What do I do?
So
Well, that's a novelty one.
That's for the
I'll put that back.
Yeah, that's for the screen.
That's
but,
just to hold up. There you go. Beautiful.
We'll give you the proper voucher, and you can head to Golf Box, and you'll find plenty of stuff on there, mate. So.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Please.
Also, our naming right partners, Fleet Plan Hire Solution. Now, they're not golf, but they're golf mad.
They're earth moving. So
they're
Are they earth moving?
Yeah. So, but we always say we don't have a bulldozer to send you home with, but
When
they
I
love
was-
their golf.
When I was 3, I'd sit in my father's knee on a D4 Caterpillar.
Oh, right.
the old caterpillars.
The dozer.
Yeah,
There you
there you
Put it
go.
on the back of the truck, and we'd
Yep.
go off, and he'd dig a dam, and I'd sit on his knee.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have one to send home to you today. But what we do have is a golf pack, courtesy of Fleet Plan Hire. So you've got a glove, a towel, balls, tees,
That's one.
socks. Yeah,
Yeah.
a bit of everything they're going to send you home with. So
Bit of a golf pack.
bit of a golf
golf
pack
pack.
for you. So hopefully that'll get that
love it.
handicap nice and
Oh yeah, well,
more improved.
I don't
Yeah.
yes.
Well, this has been a really fascinating chat, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's been
You
amazing.
can sound a bit more enthusiastic.
No,
So, will this bloke ever stop talking?
no. I'd love to chat for another hour, but you got another podcast to do.
I'm
So,
going to do my own. They pay me.
but
Well, one more time, the book again. Just maybe plug it
That
one more
is-
time.
It's
Just
called Life and Crimes.
Life and Crimes.
Which is the same name as my most excellent podcast, which is sort of produced for my very good friends and employers at the Herald Sun. True stories from Australia's Underbelly. Amazing that word crept in.
beautiful. Is there a
And it's by
website or
me,
anything?
Andrew Rule.
Andrew Rule. Now, is there a website or anything we can go and buy it
I
or order it
don't
from,
know,
or
but
is it?
that is published by Pam McMillan. It's available, as I said, at all.
I'm
good
sure it's
bookshops
available
and
online too.
especially all the bad ones.
Right. Well, we'll have a look for that. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it, and it's been a
It's
pleasure.
a pleasure to come and see you fellas.